It was the least fun year I've ever had in my life. It's thankfully only because of work, but that's been the only point in my life where I just didn't feel very happy. There was a massive responsibility, I think, to Amy Liptrot to do her story justice, to not feel like we were skimming over any detail, because I feel like every single moment of that particular time and from her childhood was relevant, was poignant, and we wanted to value that as much as we could in the movie. Obviously there were certain things from the film that we couldn't include, just because we would have had, you know, a 6-hour-long film if that was the case. But yeah, we just really wanted to honour the sort of journey that she'd gone on, and in turn also really respect the experience of any addict. I didn't want it to feel ever like it was a caricature, especially when I was playing drunk. I wanted it to feel like it was rooted in something very real. So yeah, so we always had that in the back of our mind. I've definitely swam in cold water before, on and off screen. That's just something that I love to do. But I've never delivered lambs. That was very new. And there was also sections of the movie which you don't really focus on too much, where we would go to Orkney during nesting season for the birds, and I would purposely walk into a site that had a lot of eggs, and the birds would swoop down and attack me, which was the plan. So yeah, the whole thing about this movie was sort of bending to the natural elements that are part of the film. But it was great, it was a lot of firsts, yeah. I think Greta was speaking from experience. She was writing about what she knew. She did it in such an honest, loving way. I think everyone was really affected by the mother-daughter relationship.
I want to go where culture is, like
How
New
in the
York,
world did I raise such a
or at least
snob?
Connecticut or New Hampshire, where writers live in the woods.
Get into those schools anyway.
Mom!
Whether you were a father or a son or the partner to someone who had that kind of dynamic with their mum, there were a lot of people that could really connect to that, because I think at that point in a young person's life, everything is so extreme and so dramatic and so much is changing, and you know, your relationship with usually your mother in particular becomes quite tumultuous, or a parent, I guess. So yeah, I guess she clicked into something that people were ready for. And like, who knows, if Lady Bird had been made maybe 10 years before that, maybe people wouldn't have been in the same mindset to welcome it with open arms in the way that they did. But I think it just came along at exactly the right time. It was the least fun year I've ever had in my life. It's thankfully only because of work, but that's been the only point in my life where I just didn't feel very happy. But I also think that was like the age I was, a lot of hormones. And it was my equivalent to leaving for college. I was like 20 years old, and I, you know, had still only recently started working away without my mum. So I didn't have this like emotional crutch there. And I was moving into this next stage of lead roles that just demanded more of me. And then going into Lady Bird, I was so desperate to impress Greta, and was also so aware that I was essentially playing a version of her. So again, like with the Outrun, sort of felt that pressure. But it was my age and it was my head, and you know, I've never had a year like that. I don't really want to have a year like that again, but I feel like any actor I've spoken to has always had one year where they were like, yeah, I couldn't wait to get to the end of it. But I think I learned a lot from it. I developed acne that year. It was a big year. It was really liberating. I think I felt very ready to go out on my own. I was like 18, 19, and my mum had been my chaperone from when I was very young. She was an incredible influence on me, and I think she gave me a really strong foundation to just sort of survive being on a film set and working away from home and staying disciplined and looking after yourself. And so I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to go crazy when she left, but it definitely felt like the right time.
Here,
thank you.
It's a book.
I see.
Romantic Poetry, Volume 1. And Mr. Gustav recommended it. I have a copy of my own as well. I ruined the surprise.
To get to eat with like Bill Murray, who I'd worked with years before, and Jeff Goldblum, and like the Coppolas and people like that was fantastic. And yes, as you said, Wes really wants to create a certain atmosphere when he's making his films, and it was great to be a part of that. I mean, I'd grown up working with big names, so it's never really been something that has like knocked me off my feet, because I've always, again, my mum really instilled this kind of way of thinking in me that, you know, everyone's just a person. But there were some really kind people on that set and a really great crew, actually. So sometimes I would have dinner with all the famous gang, and then I'd like run across the road to the bar to be with the crew. That was my second project with Greta, and the difference in me, I think, between that and Lady Bird was night and day. How I could work with her, how I could be more of a collaborator to her, how I felt more sort of able and kind of in my power as an actor. It was a massive, massive difference, and I think it only made the work better for both of us.
Laurie's returning, you know.
Oh, he is?
There's a letter from Amy. She's coming home.
For me, it was an incredible energy. I had one of the most special experiences making Little Women, mainly because of Greta, of course, but also Timothy came back and we have such a close bond. And Eliza Scanlon, who is now a dear, dear friend of mine, who I just think is the most talented, brilliant young woman. I loved it. I loved being with a gang of girls. I'd had that on Mary Queen of Scots. Again, the five of us are still very, very close friends, and when we were shooting, myself and all the girls got on really well, and we were like sisters essentially. So yeah, I loved my time on it. Margot and I knew each other a little bit from the awards circuit, which we had done the year before when she had I, Tonya and I had Lady Bird. So we got to know each other a little bit through that, and yeah, I think what we kept a distance from was seeing each other in all of our regalia. So like when she was dressed, when she was made up to look like Elizabeth, I never knew what she looked like, because there needed to be that sort of shock value when I see her for the first time. And she's this sort of revered queen who has developed pox and physically is just sort of deformed by the time I see her. And in turn, it was more effective for her not to see this sort of young, bright, luminous queen who could potentially take her throne.
I should have stayed true to your love. I should have followed your example and never married.
Then you would have no son.
Whose mother is without a crown.
So it was really powerful, actually, and I'd never worked like that before. And I think what it did is that it gave us this like healthy, nervous feeling. We had there was a lot of anticipation before we shot that scene, and I remember when we saw each other for the first time, which was on camera, it was kind of like nothing else. And I remember we finished the first take and we just like held each other for ages afterwards. So yeah, it was really special, yeah. I don't ever choose a part to change myself as a person, but it does naturally happen. And it did happen with Mary Queen of Scots for sure. I think I had had a couple of years of like doing things like Brooklyn and Lady Bird, where I was still sort of like finding my feet in terms of leading projects as an adult, as a young adult. It was quite overwhelming, and it took me a minute to calm myself enough to like use the skill that I had and use it in the right way, so that by the time I got to Mary Queen of Scots, I was 23. I had a long prep time for that. I had like months and months and months to let the idea of Mary sort of percolate in my head. I got to know the other cast way ahead of time. I worked with a movement coach called Wayne McGregor, who I also worked with on the Outrun, who was like, he was my, like, just my golden ticket. He was the one that really kind of helped me to find her. And it meant that when we actually shot the film, I felt very empowered as an actor, I think, because I'd done all of this work ahead of time, and also the fact that I was getting to play someone who was empowered as a person. It just added this like armour to me that I didn't lose once I'd finished filming.
Konbini!